Aloha and welcome to another edition of Not for Sale. Very happy to be with you again today. And I have with me as a guest a young man named Victor Hugo
Orozco Diaz.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about yourself.
I was originally born and raised in Los Angeles, California. I did 9 years in the United States military as a Marine. Went to Iraq and Afghanistan, and shortly after my departure from the military, I decided to stay here in Hawaii, where I've been living and thriving ever since.
Wow.
And trying to change one mind at a time.
Well, I like that. Change
Yeah.
one mind at a time. Because what's happening in the larger sense, like the name of our show,
Yes.
Not for Sale. We were talking earlier. Who owns the space between your ears? That's
Yes.
something we never really think about. You know, it's like there's all this advertising, everybody's telling you what to buy, what to dress like, how to be, how to comb your hair. And nobody wants to be just you. Who are we? Where does that come from anyway? Now, you're from LA, you say. You grew
Yeah,
up there.
I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. You know, I would say I have a really, unique, but not so unique if you're really from there. My mother, she came over the country illegally, snuck through the border, and planted the flag in American soil with myself. And, that's how I became to be here in America as an American citizen. You know, sometimes I always think, like, if I was born in Mexico, I'd just be some farmer on a farm, growing corn, raising pigs, and riding horses all day long. But, instead, I'm here in Hawaii and just trying to be engaged as much as I can with as many people as I can.
It's interesting you said that about how your mother came, right?
Yes.
Now beware, because there's someone out there watching who might have you reported to ICE, and they'll come in
Whoa.
here and
Hey.
drag you away.
Well, no, I got my social security number. I'm perfectly fine. Maybe they can't drag me away for different reasons, but, I hope they're legal.
I have a very good friend of mine. He and
Yes.
we went to high school together and all this, right? His name is Manuel Orellano.
Yes.
And he gets pulled over in Texas, and the cop wants to see his green card. So,
Right.
Okay, Pancho. Where's this? My name's not Pancho. My name is,
And I think that's a really nice point because, I think I've been away from, the mainland America and been here in Hawaii. And here in Hawaii, it's a very different culture. And, I think it's because, the certain people and how they're raised and, how they're affected. Last time I was in California, I was there as a child. I was there uneducated. I was there poor. I was there in a lot of things, unbeneficial or, not being able to thrive in the area that we're supposed to. And, I always think and wonder the reason why I speak the way I speak so nicely and pronounce as much as I can correctly is because when I was a child in school, they didn't allow us to speak Spanish. They really tried to steal and rob our culture in California back in the 1980s. And so, going back to Los Angeles and today's day and age, I see a lot of the culture and a lot of the areas surrounding, where I used to be from completely different. But a lot of the mindsets are still the same. I think they call it gentrification. You can make an area as beautiful and, inflate artificially the property value, which I think is one of the things that's coming
and so
around
that's why
here
we
in
have so
Hawaii,
many homeless people.
And that's a really important thing. It's like everyone always loves to look down on other people instead of looking at people like they're human beings, like they're your brother and your sister, and like their family. And I think that's one of the reasons why I loved Hawaii here, is because not everyone was sold on the idea of their forefathers or of the cultures or if the separation of races or something like that. And it really plays an important part, I think, in, of how cultures in today's day and age in America are being raised and why, we do experience the issues that we do these days. The title of your show is Not for Sale. You're like, who owns the space between our ears? Like, I know I own my mind. I think sometimes I think maybe I'm having too much of a crazy idea, but then I could talk to other people, and share my thoughts and my opinions and not feel, ostracized for exactly what I'm saying.
It's funny because most of us are unaware of our programming.
Yes.
Because that's what television does. That's what all media does is it programs you primarily to buy things. Okay?
Yes.
Like in the 50s, they used to have what we call subliminal advertising. Okay, like for example, you go to the movies and you're sitting there and you're watching this picture and you don't really see it because you say you got 30 in fact, I did this myself, where you have 30 frames per second.
Yes.
Right? Now, in 5 frames, which is fast enough for your brain to catch it, but not your conscious awareness, you'll see someone drinking a Coke.
Yeah.
Or someone doing this.
Well,
and so you are wanting one. You're thinking,
well, you know, I think I really saw that when I returned back and, you know, I spent time with my family. You know, they were so commercialized, you know, and the things they did and where they went to shop and what they wore and everything else like that. I think here in Hawaii, since I'm not, you know, around that kind of society or really listen to like mainstream media or, you know, advertisements on TVs, advertisement in movies or any kind of like that, you know, I just kind of block it out. Or if I do see something like that, I'd be like, you know, why are they showing this? You know, like you said, like, you know, there could be a Coke bottle or a beer bottle here with the label just
that's
so
why in
carefully
movies,
placed.
yeah,
you
that's
know,
the product placement.
And I think like in today's day and age, they know and they do get away with a lot of stuff. And you really wonder why, you know, so many large corporations own such mass companies, broadcast companies. And so you have Disney who owns a large variety of things. And when they push out a movie, suddenly every station's like, this is the greatest movie ever. It's so amazing. It's like, you know, breaking broadcast records. But it's like, well, you know, the company that made the movie also owns the company that made the music, and they also own the actors, and they also own, you know, where they show up on what channels, and they also own the television stations and the radio stations and the newspaper stations that say this is the greatest movie ever.
I think there's only 6 different corporations that own all the television, radio stations in the country.
And I think that, you know, in the next year or two, you'll see that really phased out to 5, because I think, you know, Disney's trying to buy a little chunk of Fox News Broadcasting Company. And then it's like, you know, they already own CBS, I think. And it's like, you know, what else are they trying to own? Why are they trying to own it? You know, and what are they really trying to accomplish? Maybe they're just being a great company and like trying to, expand their horizons. But is that really fair to the people?
Well, it's like right now we have Spectrum.
Yes.
Okay,
Well,
and what's going on with them. And we've noticed that there's a lot more commercials on cable TV than used to be.
Yes, and I think maybe that's one of the reasons why they bought Time Warner Cable, and not just here in Hawaii, but like everywhere else in the country. But I also think that's one of the reasons why, this net neutrality thing passed, because they're really trying to control exactly how information gets sent. And if you have like this thing called the internet, where you can access anything, anywhere, everywhere, I think that really scares people, or at least those large corporations. And I think will we see a day where it's like, where America's like China, and they're gonna limit everything that we could see outside of the country? Are they gonna limit what we could access? Are they going to limit, all the private, VPNs, so we can actually reach outside the world? I think, maybe they just want to shadow us. I think ignorance. They say ignorance is bliss.
That's part of the demographics. They look at, like on Facebook, they know what kind of things you're interested in, so they feed you more of what you're interested in already. And so you think it's my idea, but it's not. Now, when I was a kid, there were only 3 TV stations. There was NBC, ABC, CBS. They went off at midnight. It was very different.
Yes.
Very, very, very different. And when we talked about the news stations, how different it was to have Walter Cronkite, a guy who...
Very credible people that you would believe.
Yeah. They weren't trying to make us think, hey, this is a great thing. He would tell you the story.
Real journalists exposing real stories and trying to throw the truth out as much as they can. And I think that's something that we're really missing in today's day and age in the news organizations, because it's not so much, what they're saying or what the story is, but necessarily like who the personality is behind, the story, and whether or not, they did like 30 studies where it's like if you wore this tie, if you wore this jacket, and it's just
that comes from back in the old days of advertising,
right,
where they actually did these psychological studies to find out what will influence them to do it.
right. And I think today's day and age, it's like gotten so well fine-tuned that it's really missing in everyone's eyes. They're more than happy than to believe and be spoon-fed the stories that are going on the TV, because it's like, oh, it's TV, it's the news, it's real, this is exactly what's going on in the world, but it's a well-orchestrated script. And if you don't think so, then I don't think you're necessarily believing it. That's why, I try to stay away from like just regular television. I would say I get a lot of my news from like, different sources online. And, I listen to the very extreme right and read their articles as much as like, ridiculous as it might be. And I read the left articles as ridiculous as it might be, and just try to find some sort of happy medium in the middle where it's like all the thing I'm concentrating on is on the truth.
It's funny when you say that about the truth, is how most people, in our earlier conversation, you were saying you didn't know much about the history of Hawaii.
Right.
And it's interesting because the country of Hawaii very, very seldom comes up to any conversation, except for those of us who are pushing for the return of the nation.
Yes.
And to realize that the United States, they take over mentally, economically, and militarily.
Yes.
By feeding them the ideas that they wanted them to have. Like, okay, some people don't like this when you bring up the idea of the missionaries. First of all, we're going to send in the missionaries to Christianize these people.
Right. And, I think that's really, America's a very imperialistic force.
Yes.
Our outreach is greater than any other country else in the world. We're in so many countries doing so many different things, influencing so many parties, I wouldn't say parties, but influencing so many markets and like and different things. Today, day and age, we're upset because Russia influenced our election. Well,
how many times has the U.S.?
Well, let's take a look at what countries America has really influenced in those places.
Yes.
We'll talk about all of Southern America, all of Eastern Europe. This is the reason why the fall of Russia and why the USSR happened, and it's because America didn't want this strong force that mirrored itself, and maybe you remember like 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7 years ago when Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of Defense, and there was this
Secretary of State.
Secretary of State, and we had this big issue with what's going on in Ukraine. Russia was trying to, it was under Russian influences, but no one really wants to talk about how America went in there and put a bunch of neo-Nazis into power, and had them do a bunch of curfews, and then just throw the whole country in a loop. And you wonder why Russia was really angry that something right next to them happened.
This happens continually around the world,
and it's still going on in Southern America.
And the story that we are given
Yes.
is often so very different. Like, for example, Muammar Gaddafi.
Yes.
Oh, he's vilified. He was this horrible, horrible guy.
He was the CIA's guy.
Well, until he decided that he was going to do something for his own people. When suddenly he says, we're going to base our money on the gold standard, and that Africa should be for the Africans. We should be making this money.
And I think that's a really strong point that you make, because I think a lot of the turmoils in the countries that we're in is a fight for resources. I think why we have these weird tariffs over things like steel or minerals or just regular things is because China is using American strategy and building up in Africa and getting all those natural resources and having all these crazy trains and shipping lanes go straight to China, where they're mass producing all our things and stealing the business of America. And I guess you could see why, these tariffs, as bad as it may seem in the forefront, is trying to, really produce American, production up.
In some ways. But, it's interesting, you were an Iraq
Yes.
veteran and Afghanistan as well?
Yes, I was both in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Interestingly enough, Iraq, now we realize how many people, these oil companies that have taken over the resources of Iraq. Then let's look at Afghanistan. The poppy industry, the heroin industry.
I think you really had to look at why America has such an opiate issue and why it's risen up in the last 10 years. And like, why all these like companies, are really, no politicians doing anything against like pharmaceutical companies or the, or the insurance companies. And why maybe this Obamacare thing was such a great idea, because you basically saying, hey, whatever pills you got to sell, it's on the American dollar.
Yeah.
And people I don't think are wise or really educated enough to know they don't need these crazy chemicals.
But you notice about that in the advertising, the way it works. They'll show a bunch of people having a great time on television. They're dancing, they're doing stuff. Oh yes, this pill will cure everything that ails you.
Yeah.
But then at the end, you have real special side effects. Okay, beware, of course, it causes
sudden death.
It's like,
loss of limbs.
Death
and it's
has
like,
occurred.
But that's the thing though. It's like you take one pill and then they're like, oh, I'm having stomach with my problems.
So they give you another one.
So they give you another one, and then they'll give you another one, and soon enough you have a cocktail of pills, and then you're in the hospital because your liver failed.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, good thing you got medical insurance.
I'm going to tell you what happened with me in the VA. Okay. Now the VA, I'm a veteran, so I go there and they take care of my stuff, right? And they always want to know what kind of medicines are you taking here, and I quit taking this mess that you guys gave me. And just like I told my doctor just the other day on Thursday.
Yeah.
Yes, I do smoke a little weed every once in a while.
Right.
And they were like, we don't want to know that.
Well, that's the really big thing, though. It's like, that's what I don't understand. The VA, as great as it is, and fundamentally what it's trying to do for the veterans, it's like, I think one thing they do to fail people is just continue that cycle of like, hey, take these pills, and then maybe you'll feel better. And then, and if you're not crazy or didn't kill yourself, and then and if then okay, I guess it's working. And like I think a lot of things aren't really being said about the way pharmaceuticals really happen or what they do to the body or the mind. And that's another thing that I believe in. One thing I practice is just trying to limit myself and what goes in my body as much as possible, and just keep it as natural as I possibly can. That's one thing I learned here in Hawaii. It's like, you don't need all this.
Speaking of Hawaii, about that happening, what led to our big drug problem in the 80s, okay, in Hawaii, was when Reagan was elected president. They look around and they said, we've got all these Hawaiians and local people sitting around smoking marijuana on the beaches and all this. We need to get rid of that.
Right.
So what they did was they instituted what they call green harvest, where they eradicated all the marijuana fields.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and suddenly marijuana became very expensive. At the same time that happened, all these guys show up with this meth and all this stuff. Oh, this is cheap. And unfortunately, the way our school systems work, kids are taught that a drug is a drug is a drug.
Yeah, well, I think we were talking about public education before.
Yeah.
I'm a derivative of public education, and I would say it's extremely limited. And maybe that's just because I came from California, but I think that's one really important thing that I see, especially here in Hawaii, where the public education system really fails kids these days. And you kind of really have to wonder why, but then you also kind of really have to see maybe that's what they want. They don't teach you all the important things. They teach you a very doctored system of American history. Very doctored, system of social studies. Maybe they get like mathematics and
well, they did away with
like,
the study of what we used to have. It was civics classes.
Yes.
We had to learn about politics and how that all works. They did away with that program. They don't do that anymore.
I think,
so we have these history classes. Like I'm a substitute teacher, right?
Right.
I go into a classroom. The kids are studying about the Alamo.
Right.
Say, what were they fighting for?
Yeah.
Well, they were fighting for freedom. Freedom to do what?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, what? What do you mean freedom to do what? Well, they don't mention that Texas was Mexico.
Right.
Okay.
Well, most of like Southern America was part of Mexico, and during
Mexico
that war,
had outlawed
Yeah.
slavery, but the Americans come in, and Americans being who they are,
Yeah.
we can do what we want wherever we are. So, and that's what happened when they came to Hawaii.
And
The Americans, they overthrew the government because that was getting in they're cutting their profits. You see, as long as Hawaii was a foreign country,
right.
they'd have to pay this tariff importing Hawaiian sugar into the mainland.
Right.
But if this is American territory, we don't have to pay that tax.
And you know that was a really big industry, the sugar industry here in the beginning of Hawaii and stuff like that. And you know, I think history repeats itself, and you know, it's just always bound to happen. I think, but I think the fault in all that is like, you know, if we don't educate people on the real history of what's going on and not just play one perspective of it all, you know, like today's day and age, it's like, oh, we're in the longest continuous wars in the most amount of countries
I
in
don't know
today's
about
day.
that. We've
I would say it's
100 years war.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, American history, you know.
Yeah. But see, most of us, we never learn about any of that.
But and that's exactly
you said
true.
That you were self-educated.
Yes.
So was I, mostly, in the sense that I grew up reading.
Right.
I always read everything I could possibly find about every subject.
And I think reading is a very important thing, and that
But now
really
kids don't like to
really
read.
opens up the mind and the eyes, and just expands on their critical thinking and kind of it's self thinking. I think.
Critical thinking, that's,
Yeah.
ooh. we
Oh,
don't
I know,
want that.
right?
We
It's
don't
like
want
think for
that.
yourself. It's like whoa.
No.
It's like no, thank you. You know,
We'll-
just
we'll tell you this.
look at this TV screen and hear the script that these guys are saying.
Speaking of scripts, you remember
Yeah.
a few days ago there was this media company
Right.
that bought all of these news stations,
Yes.
and they were all verbatim saying the exact same script. You know,
And I think, maybe that was their fault because maybe they should have changed it up or something like that. But like maybe they think we're just that stupid
Yeah.
and don't think or realize
that's
that
what it
that's
is.
what's going on. But for the maybe 10% of the viewers who saw it and realized it and maybe paid attention to it, there's a whole 90% of people who
really don't
saw
care.
it and listened to it and believe it is absolute truth.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the fault is, and like I hate catching the news here in Hawaii because it's the exact same news on Channel 2, on Channel 4, Channel 6,
Yeah.
Channel 8. And like even then, you don't even have an opposing newspaper article. The newspaper is just like a fancy advertisement for all the businesses here in
fact,
Hawaii.
it's called
the
what?
Hawaii
The-
Tourism
the
Authority, I want to
Advertiser.
say. Yeah.
I forget. Years ago, we had
Two,
the
right.
Advertiser and the Star Bulletin.
Right. And there
Two
was
different opposing
And
points
I
of
remember
view.
when I first came here in Hawaii back in 2003, there was a lot of like small newspaper companies that no longer exist because
Yeah.
I think, they just
Because
try to
they
die
can't
them out.
compete with-
Well, I think they couldn't compete because, they made it really difficult for these places or these companies to like, make their money off advertisement and all this other stuff. But also, they had opposing views to everything. When, the Star advertisement was like, yeah, pro rail, let's build
Yeah.
it, it's going to help, blah, 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 all these people. There was these like not very publicized or marketed, newspaper companies that would say, oh, this is horrible idea. This is billions of dollars worth
Yeah.
of waste. It's like,
But nobody
it's
cares.
But, no one really read it. I read it. I picked it up because I
Yeah.
was like, whoa, this is really interesting. Just the same way I'll like pick up a newspaper and read the first front page, but then I'd like, after reading a paragraph or two, I'd be like, no,
Yeah.
thank you. But, if like something or someone really has something worth saying, then I think, I'm going to definitely listen to it. But I think that level of, what
Well-
something is worth listening to is really different from people,
Yeah.
And I think that's where we kind of lose ourselves.
But it's funny because we all want to be entertained
Yes.
rather than informed. And we are entertained by those things that we already agree with.
Right.
When you talk to someone who disagrees with you, you may actually learn something.
Yeah. Well,
But-
I talk to a lot of people with opposing views. It's like, I have the way I think and where I view stuff, and I wouldn't say it's like, in cement, but, I'm always willing to hear what other people have to say, like yourself, like my friends, even someone that's really extreme one side or really extreme on the other. Because, like, for me, it's like I want to listen to you. I want to see what you really think. and not just what you think, but why you think that, you know?
Yeah.
Is it from what you're reading? Is it from where you were brought up? You know, is it because you truly believe this? Or, you know, it could be any of those, you know, spectrum of things.
You know, it's funny because I look back at where I grew up in West Virginia
Yes.
and how there was a Hawaiian family that lived there in my hometown.
Yes.
Of course, they were black people. As far as folks in McDowell County, West Virginia are concerned.
If the skin's dark.
Yeah, you're not white.
Yeah.
I don't know what
It's
you
one
are, but
extreme
you're
or
not
the
white.
other, yeah.
And it's kind of interesting how he and I were friends in high school, and I dated his sister for a while,
Yeah.
and that kind of a thing. And
Yeah.
then I ended up living in Hawaii. He still lives back in West Virginia.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, you know, and he talks about coming over here to stay sometimes, but he doesn't do it because he's already bought into what he can do and what he can't do. You can't leave.
It's a really, really important point. You know, I think, you know, part of like American, you know, systematic way of like, of controlling people is from stealing, you know, their heritage or their history. And, you know, I see it a lot in today's day and age. Like for me, like, you know, like I was saying, like my mother came over across the border and like I know and acknowledge like if I was born over there, you know, I'd be on a farm, but I'm not, you know, and I think, you know, that important part in history
A few minutes,
of
seconds.
everything else is like, you know, why I am the person I am today.
Yes, indeed. We are who we are because we know who we are because having spent some time with our kupuna, the elders, we grew from them
Yes.
and want to make them proud. You know, I always had this philosophy in life. If I would be ashamed to tell my grandmother about it, don't do it. It's that simple.
Ah, I like that. Yeah.
I want to thank you for coming here and being with us. We didn't get to talk too much about your Afghanistan and Iraq thing there, but what I find is interesting is that all of us veterans learn what really is happening once you're in it. You don't, you know, the story they tell you beforehand, it doesn't quite fit.
Yeah. That's
And so
very
for
true.
all of you who tuned in once again, I want to thank you for being here with us. And aloha, and see you next time. Malama pono, hui ho.